Okay, here we are. Shavua Tov, Miriam.
שבוע טוב, אלי. חנוכה שמח.
Hanukkah Sameach. Might be a little too early for some people. You can give it a
Well, I don't know. I sent it out to a few people, so.
Yeah, no, I saw. I think it's a busy night, right? I mean,
I don't know. It's like, RJC is doing something like outside, which is a little weird. I mean, hey, I don't know. I haven't been outside at all today, so I don't know how warm or not it is.
it's not so bad. It's a little misty. It's cold,
Yep.
but it's not terrible. I think it's
Okay.
reasonable.
All right. So, I mean, it's Friday Shul. We're only doing something by Zoom on Tuesday.
Right.
And I don't know what HIR is doing.
HR has something tonight at 8:30, but I don't exactly know what it is. But I'm not sure about much else. I don't remember seeing anything, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
Shavua tov, Hanan.
We have Hanan, Shavua Tov, Hanukkah Sameach.
Oh,
You're muted, Hanan? Oh,
yes,
no.
there we go. Yes, Chag Sameach, everybody.
Hey.
Shabbat
Chag
Shalom.
Sameach.
So should we give it a couple minutes?
Yeah.
Well, there's a few more things we have to do tonight.
I know. It's a longer service.
A longer service, yeah. A few additions to the tefillot. We're already saying Mashiva Ruach Amrita Geshem, so that takes another few seconds.
That's the difference, right?
That's it, yeah. Okay. You're the boss, so.
Yeah, we'll do it. Okay, let's get started. Let's review. We have a new parak in a few words, so even if someone comes late, they'll catch on to that.
There we go.
But I don't think we're up to the parak yet. So
No.
until we got to the last 4 lines on Chaf Amud Bet,
Okay.
which again I don't know I don't think anyone else was there, but we could.
Yeah.
Well, you want to do them? Let's do them. Why not? It'll be complete.
Yeah.
The HIR daf only. Okay.
It's all right. I mean, I'll go back and do it.
No, we'll do it. Is that what that's fine. It's good to do. And I know it's the closing, yesterday's daf was really a good summary of everything we did last week.
Right.
Good might be a strong word, but it was, hopefully you followed all week. And then yesterday's daf was really easy. So, because it was really reviewed many of the concepts. But the last one, so we're 4 lines from the bottom at the word takala, which is the middle of the line. But the last thing was a discussion as to whether if you have something that you could, in the case we were talking about was wine, right? And wine that was tameh that's truma, that's tameh, could not be drunk, I guess. But you could, in theory, pour it onto the ground in a way that would make your house nicer. Right? They used to do something called ziluf, which is they would sprinkle, I guess, I think it seems to me that it's like perfume, basically. Like it smells nice, it gets in the dirt, it enhances the environment in the house.
There were a lot of bad smells in those times.
There were, correct. There were a lot of bad smells in those times. So that was a nice thing. But as the Gemara said yesterday, it only works if the wine is sort of old wine, but fresh wine doesn't smell good. So the issue was, can you leave around your truma tamea wine, which you could not drink, and if you drank, you'd be over big problems. So can you leave it over to use it for this, or do you worry about what's called takala? You worry that people are going to come to drink it, not realizing what it is. So says the Gemara today, sorry?
The Kohen has it.
The Kohen, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter, but yeah, let's say the Kohen has it.
Okay.
You're saying you could worry about truma anytime, but yeah, let's say the Kohen has it, but it's tummy, right? Says the Gemara, takala atzma tnai. This question as to whether or not you make someone throw something away, because if they leave it around, they'll lead to something wrong. That itself is a machloket tanaim, the Tanya. As we learned in the following Breita, the Breita says very clearly, chavit shel yayin shel truma, you have a barrel of wine that is truma, shenitmeit, becomes tamei, by mistake, someone drops a sheretz in, whatever, it becomes tamei. So, says Beit Shammai, tishbok chaval, you throw chaval. You throw out the whole thing. Rashi's the word chavel comes with word chavila, like a bundle, meaning, just dump it out, basically. Just dump out the whole thing. Beit Hillel omrim taseh ziluf. Beit Hillel says, no, you can keep the barrel around. You have wine that's not drinkable because it's tamei, so even by Kohen, but why throw it away? Use it for ziluf, which again inevitably means using it up slowly. Ziluf, pouring wine on your floor is not ziluf, right? That's just a puddle. But you can sprinkle it out over a few days or over a few weeks. Now, that's not the machloket tanaim, even though it seems like it, because we really go like Beit Hillel. So you would never really say Tanaihi, Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. But continues the Gemara. I'm a Rebbe of the Breita. I'm Rebbe Yishmael bar Rebbe Yossi. Now remember, Yishmael bar Rebbe Yossi was a contemporary of Rebbe. So this is 5 generations later from Beit Hillel, right? At least 5 or 6 generations. So much later, 150 years later, says Rebbe Yishmael, or 100 years later, says Rebbe Yishmael bar Rebbe Yossi, Ani achriya. I'm going to come up with a compromise between the opinion of Beit Shammai, who seems to say you got to always dump it out, and the opinion of Beit Hillel, who says that you can use it for ziluf. I will compromise. Bisadeh, if this happens out in the field, where of course you don't need to clean up your floor, you're out in the open, and so you'll only be useful when you moved back home, which might be a week or a month or whatever. Tishbo chava. Then you should dump out the whole thing because then maybe you'll drink it on the way. You'll have takala. But by it, if this happens when you're living at home, then taseh ziluf. Then you should go like Beit Hillel and do ziluf. And Ikadamri, or some people said that what Yishmael bar Yossi said was, if it's chadash, if it's new wine, so therefore it doesn't have all the pleasant smells, then tishbol chaval, you should just dump the whole thing out. But biyashan, if it was old wine, then taseh ziluf, then you should do the sprinkling thing. So that's what Rabbi Yishmael bar Rebbe Yossi said, that I will compromise between the opinions of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and I paskin this one. Amrulo, they said to him, on top line of Chav Aleph, Ein hachra'at shlishit machra'at, that a third, when you talk about hachra'ah means you compromise between 2 opinions. But if you make up your own opinion, that's not a compromise, right? And so says Rashi, what they meant to say to him was that you are assuming, Rabbi Yishmael bar Rebbe Yossi, that the reason for Beit Hillel was because Beit Hillel says, I worry about takala, but I don't worry too much. Meaning I worry that you might mess it up, but I'm not worried that you're going to do it everywhere. I'm sorry, and Beit Shammai was then saying that I worry about it everywhere, and you're coming up with a compromise. But in fact, there could be a whole different reason, and we don't know what it is. Not takala, that explains Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And therefore, because it seems that according to the other who argue with Rabbi Yishmael, they may not hold it as takala at all. That's what we mean when we say it's tonight. So machloket tanaim is between Rabbi Yishmael, who seems to worry about takala, and therefore in the field he says you should dump it out, and if it's new he says you should dump it out, and his friends who are unnamed, right, who disagreed with him and said ein hachra'ah shlishit machrat. Okay. Continues the Gemara, first line. James, on the first line of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. This is just again a last bit of taharot before we get back to Pesachim. So just to give you your fill for the week. So it says, I could see everyone wants to fill. It says Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. Remember, one of the arguments that we've been discussing for the last 5 days is this case, if you recall, where you have wine in the gut, right? In the, what do we call the gut? Threshing or whatever.
Pressing floor.
Pressing floor.
Threshing, yeah.
Not threshing. Pressing.
Pressing.
Wine in the gut that is in the floor in a bar that is tamei. It's chulin tmeim, meaning regular people who are not makbid on taharot can drink the wine all day long. It's tamei though. On top you have a barrel of wine that is truma, that is tahar. And then it starts getting a crack, and you know it's going to drip down, right? If it drips down into the bottom one, it's going to make that both tamei, it's going to become tamei, because that's tamei, and make it all truma. and therefore it's truma tmeya, and the whole thing has to be thrown out. No one can drink it. Said the Gemara, the Mishnah actually, that if you can save even a revi'it b'tahara, even one small portion with a cup of tahar wine, then you should do it. But if you can't, what do you do? So there we had a machloket. And the machloket was, Rabbi Yoshua said, you can be mitameh biyad, you can put out a tameh cup to catch the truma, you're making it tameh, but at least you're saving all the wine underneath from being ruined. And Rabbi Eliezer said, you cannot do anything. You got to let the wine drop, make everything tameh, you'll throw it all out, because you cannot actively make something tameh. Okay?
Isn't the wine just one big mixture? Or, it's dripping into it or something?
It's
or
dripping
what?
into it, yeah. There's a crack in the one on top, and you can catch it before it gets there.
Okay, right.
So says that, now that's just a reminder. Reb Yossi, Rabbi Chanina on the top line. Machloket, they only argue, again, about whether you can catch it and make it tameh, or let it go down passively and become tameh. That's only shenafla lepachot me'asa achulin, tmein. That's only if there was less than 100 to 1 ratio of chulin to truma. Aval nafla leme'ah chulin, tmein. If it fell into 100 to 1 ratio, then the truma is batel in chulin. Remember, truma is batel in 100, 1 in 100. So if it drops into more than 100 times itself, then the truma is going to become batel, and then it will be no longer truma. It will just be chulin that is tameh. But remember, chulin that's tameh, anyone can drink as long as they don't care about tahara. And if that's the case, then don't stick out your bucket and make it tameh. Let it drop, and then you'll be able to drink it. Everybody agrees that it should fall down, and although it becomes tameh, because basically it's going to lose its status of truma. And if you recall, we said yesterday and a week ago that the whole reason that Rabbi Yossi allowed you to do, not Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yeshua allowed you to do this is because he was worried about hefsid, about losing the wine in the bottom part. And so if the truma is going to become batel, you're not going to lose any wine because you could drink the whole thing as long as you don't care about truma. Tanya nami hachi. In fact, the Braita says this directly. Chavit shenishbira begat el yonah. You have a barrel that breaks in the upper chamber, that's truma. And underneath it, you have 100 times the amount of wine that's chulin, that's tameh. Mo de Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer admits to Rabbi Yeshua that im yachol latzil mimenu revi'it b'tahara yatzil. If you can save a revi'it, you should, which we all agree. Im lav tirid v'kitama v'ayitamen b'yad. If not, let it all fall down. Don't be mitameh b'yad, because even though it falls down into the chulin tmein, you will lose the status of truma, and therefore you'll be able to drink it. This is Gemara, but that makes a lot of sense. But it's backwards, because remember, that was the Rabbi Eliezer is the one who said you should not catch it, and Rabbi Yeshua said you should catch it. So what do you mean Rabbi Eliezer is modeh to Rabbi Yeshua that you shouldn't catch it? We should say Rabbi Yeshua is modeh to Rabbi Eliezer. Hi modeh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua. It's me modeh Rabbi Yeshua, the Rabbi Eliezer mi baile. Rabbi, you're right. Eipach, switch it around. It should have said modeh Rabbi Yeshua to Rabbi Eliezer that you should not catch the wine. Says Rav Huna, Brei of Yeshua, lo tepach, that in fact you're focusing on the second part of the Braita, which says don't catch the wine, which is Rabbi Yeshua admitting to Rabbi Eliezer. But the modeh part was talking about the first part of it. The first part said if you can catch a revi'it b'tahara, you should do it. What's the chiddush about that? Everyone agrees to that. Says Rabbi Huna, Brei of Yeshua, we're talking about hacha b'mayaskinan. This is the last tumah we're going to have for a while. You have a cup that the inside of the cup is tahar, the outside is tameh. What's the case? Remember, with a kli cheres, if you touch the outside becomes tameh, but not the inside.
Yeah.
Right? It's only if you put something inside it that it becomes tameh. Yeah. So you have a bucket. The outside of the bucket is tameh, but the inside is not. Says the Gemara, that's where Rabbi Eliezer admits that, okay, it's fine to catch the wine, even though there's a chance that if you don't catch it well and it sprinkles on the outside, it'll become tameh. So ma'od detema, I would have thought nigzar dilma naga gabo betruma. You have to, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it says you have to be really careful about never making truma tameh. That you have to be careful here that maybe the outside will touch the truma. Kamashmalan, that you have to catch it well. You don't have to worry about that. And so that's the chiddush that Rabbi Eliezer admits to Rabbi Yeshua, that you can catch your truma in a bucket that's tahor on the inside, even though it's tamei on the outside. Hadralach or la'arba asar. Okay, so
what is the proportion of tamei to tahor? The truma is batel 1 in 100. If a drop of tamei wine gets into a barrel of tahor wine, is the whole thing tamei?
I don't think so.
Is there a bittul
I have
aspect?
to check. I would imagine it's batal barov, but I have to check. I don't know for sure.
Okay, all right.
But remember the case here, Hanan, is that the
No, I know.
smaller one is tahar, right? I don't recall, but I assume truma is batal barov. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
At least midoraita, right? I mean, it might be there. Let me check, but I don't see why not. But here the issue is truma. We know is 1 in 100.
Yeah.
Continues the Gemara, the second parak now of Pesachim. Back to Pesach. We had enough of Tuma and Tara for a little bit, that we're going to come back to it, I promise you. But let's do some Pesachim. Says the Mishnah, Kol Sha'ashim Mutar Le'achol. Remember the first parak we talked about, remember we're going in order, right? You clean for chametz the night before. Then Erev Pesach morning, you got to burn it. You got to eat the chametz until you got to go to Dunkin' Donuts, and then you got to burn, right? So we had a whole debate in the first parak as to what time you can eat until. Remember, we have several opinions. Says our Mishnah, Kol sh'ashem mutar le'achol, any time that you're allowed to eat chametz, ma'achil lebehema l'chayil ofot. You can feed it to your animals, which seems pretty obvious. Like, if you can eat it, why can't you feed it to your animals? And continues the Mishnah, u'mocher l'nachri, you can sell it on, you go to the store and sell your chametz. Mutar b'hana'ato, and you can use it. You can get benefit. You can burn it in the fire to get fuel. You can do whatever you want. Avar zmano, once the time has passed that you're not allowed to eat it anymore, then asur b'hanato, then you're not allowed to get hana'ah from the chametz. And continues the Mishnah, lo yasik bo tanur v'kirayim, you shouldn't put it into your oven so that you could bake your bread with, bake your matzah with it, because you're not allowed to get benefit from it. And the Gemara's guy said that's obvious. You're just repeating the same thing over and over. But okay, Gemara will ask all these questions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, on a little bit of a non sequitur, Ein bior chametz el sreifa. The only way you're allowed to get rid of chametz is by burning it. Rabbi v'chachamim omrim, no. Af nifarer v'zorer l'ruach. You could also crush it up. Nifarer means crumble it and throw it to the wind once it's too small to really be suitable. Oh matil yam, or you could dump it down the toilet, or back in that day, throw it into the water. So you don't have to burn it. You can get rid of it some other way. And we're gonna get back to this discussion in a while, because we got some other stuff to do first. It says the Gemara. Now, 1 second. The words of the Mishnah seem a little bit strange. It says, Kol sha'ash mutar le'achol machil. Anytime you're allowed to eat chametz, you can feed it to your animals, implying hakosh kol sha'ash mutar le'achol ino machil, that when you can't eat it, you can't feed it to your animals. Lema matnitin delok Rabbi Yehuda. That seems to go against Rabbi Yehuda. What did Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda ha'ika chamesh. Remember, if you go according to Rabbi Yehuda, the 5th hour of the morning, you're allowed to have chametz, but you're not allowed to eat it. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda said you can eat until the end of the 4th hour. You don't have to burn it till the 6th hour. The 5th hour is just which is how we paskin, by the way, right? Zman achilat chametz is 9:30. Zman bir chametz is 10:30, right, or whatever equivalent is. So that's how we paskin. So there's a time where you're not allowed to eat it, but you can get hana'ah during that time. You can feed it to your animals during that hour between those things. It's not, and this is quoting the Mishnah that we had 10 days ago. Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir's opinion is that on Erev Pesach, ochlin kol chamesh, you can eat chametz all through the 5th hour. This sarfim betchilat sheish, and you have to burn it in the beginning of the 6th hour, right, when the 6th hour starts. And Rabbi Yehuda says, which means there's no time in between, right? You eat till 10:59, you got to burn it at 11 o'clock, or whatever the equivalent is. And Rabbi Yehuda says, ochlin kol arba, that you can eat chametz all for the first 4 hours of the day, and tolin kol chamesh, you are in between, right, for the 5th hour of the day, meaning you can't eat it, but you also are allowed to get hana from it. The sarfim b'tchilat sheish, and you burn in the beginning of the 6th hour. So clearly our Mishnah is not going according to Rabbi Yehuda, because our Mishnah makes it sound like eating and hana are the same thing. Says the Gemara, but you're right. It's true that it's not according to Rabbi Yehuda, but Elamai Rabbi Meir. So you're going to say it's Rabbi Meir. Remember, Rabbi Meir says you can eat all 5 hours and then you burn right afterwards. But according to Rabbi Meir, there is no time where you can't eat, but you can get hana from it, right? Says the Gemara, well, then the words in our Mishnah are not picked very well. Because why do you say, Hai kol shashin mutar le'achol, right? Why ma'achil? Anytime that you are, that someone, that it's not that someone, that it is mutar to eat chametz, you're allowed to feed it to your animals, it should have just said, kol sha'ochil ma'achil. Anytime, ochel ma'achil, anytime you eat chametz, you can feed it to your animal. Why does it have that extra word, kol shemutar le'achol? Anytime that is permitted for somebody to eat chametz, which implies that there's a someone else can eat it, but not necessarily you. Because if it was talking about you, it would just say kol she'achel ma'achil, right? It should have just said that miboile. You're right. Amar Rav bar Ula, and when we get to the answer, you'll see the explanation. Matnitin Rabbi Gamliel. In fact, our Mishnah is the third opinion that we had last parak, which was the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel. It's non. Rabbi Gamliel Omer. Gamliel said, chulin, regular food, go nechalin kol arba. You can only eat them for 4 hours, like Rabbi Yehuda said, right? Your regular Dunkin' Donuts, you can only eat till the end of the 4th hour. But truma, if you've got bread or chametz that's truma, you can eat it kol chamesh, because we didn't want you to throw away truma. So although they made a gzera that you can't eat during that time, a gzera drabanan, it doesn't apply to truma. And then sarfim b'tchilat sheish, and then you have to burn in the beginning of the 6th. And so now you have 1 hour where you are not allowed to eat, but because you're Yisrael and you're eating chulin, right? You're not allowed to eat chametz, but someone else can eat chametz. And there, what the Mishnah is trying to say, hachikama, this is what the Mishnah is saying. Kol shemutar le'achol, anytime that someone is allowed to eat, meaning a kohen could eat truma, during that hour, the 5th hour, Yisrael machil chulin lebehema l'chayelofot. The Yisrael can even get hana'ah from his regular chametz, and that's actually quite an interesting chiddush, which is that, and of course, this is how we behave, right? So we pass that even though you can only eat till the end of the 4th hour, you don't have to start burning it till the 6th hour, right? And because of that, basically, because somebody can eat during that time, meaning a kohen can eat truma, then you're allowed to get hana'ah from your truma, and not your truma, from your regular chametz, and feed it to your animals during that time. Okay.
You also paskin that way according to for the truma and kohanim?
I don't think so. So that's a good point. I don't think so. I don't know for sure because truma is not as relevant nowadays, but at least b'tahara. But I think we pass like Rabbi Yehuda overall, but we do pass like this Mishnah that you're allowed to get hana'ah from chametz during that 5th hour. Meaning, I mean, the biggest implication is selling it, right? You're allowed to, if you didn't sell your chametz, you should try to do it beforehand, just a public service, right? But if you didn't, you can sell it even in that last hour. Once you hit the 6th hour, you can't sell your chametz anymore, right? It's also hana'ah, so you can't. Remember, we had.
Is it too early to do it now?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question, and we're going to get to it later in today's daf. I don't know the answer, but you'll see what we get to. Okay? It's a fascinating question. We'll get there. Says the Gemara. First, before we get to James' question, which was really what we're all waiting for, why do you have to say behema chayav of? You can feed it to your animal and your wild animal and your birds. Why don't you say ochlim lebehema or chayot? Why does it say that? Now, of course, we all know that it says it all the time that way. But the Gemara is going to learn something extra from that. Lama li lemitna behema, lama li lemitna chaya. Why do you have to say behema? Why do you have to say chaya separately? It says Gemara tzricha. You need it. Di'itana behema is if you had just said that in the 5th hour you can feed all your leftover donuts to your cow, right? I would have thought that where am I? Di'itana behema. I would have thought that a behema is okay to feed your chametz to. Why? The misharia, if it leaves over anything, let's say the cow doesn't eat all the donuts, it gets a stomachache like you did, right? So then chazila, you'll see it, right? Because the nature of domesticated animals in this case is that like a cow, they eat and then they drop, or like a horse even in this case, you drop it and you would eat. You leave the food on the hay that you're not eating. And so basically you'll go and you'll do a scan of their pen at the end of the hour, and whatever's left, you can pick it up and burn it. Avochaya, but think about wild animals, right? The nature of wild animals. I use rats when we were learning this earlier today. Di misharya kamatzniale. When you give an animal, right, you take a feral animal and you give it food, or it takes food, it brings it into its pen and hides it. And so because we're afraid it's going to hide it, it's possible that we would say, don't feed your chametz to your rats on Erev Pesach, because they might not eat it. You won't know they didn't eat it. They'll bring it into their lair. And then later, maybe in Pesach, you'll bring it out and you'll find it, or you'll search in there. So maybe you shouldn't feed it to them. Imalo. Vitana chaya. Now, if we had just said a wild animal chaya, I might have said mishum di misharya mia mitzniya. So what? If it doesn't finish all the donuts, at least it's going to hide them. So you won't see them, right, on Pesach. Aval behema, but if you take a regular animal, right, zimnin di misharya, they might leave over some of the chametz, below masik adaita. You won't realize, you won't have checked, maybe you don't know. And the the next morning you'll come out to your pen and you'll find a donut sitting there and it's still yours, right? You were never mafkir it, you never got rid of it, you never burnt it. You'll be over and so I might think you therefore should not feed food to your animals on Erev Pesach, that's chametz, imalo, tzricha. So therefore the Mishnah comes and says, don't worry, this is getting a little too crazy. Give the food to your cows, give the food to your rats, or whatever other wild animal you want to choose, and they can let them eat it before Pesach. Ofot lamali. Why are you going to tell me birds? Birds, okay. I did tana behima b'chaya, then tani nami ofot. Once we start mentioning a few types of animals, we also say birds. But this is why our Mishnah said behima and chaya, to tell you that even though they have different behaviors in terms of food, you can give chametz to either one of them.
So this assumes you're not doing bitul and stuff, right? I mean,
This is assuming you're not doing bitul, correct?
Right.
It's a little complicated. Let's just say it's assuming you're not doing bitul, but I guess it's also conceivable that even if you're doing bitul, you don't want it to be there, right? You try to hide the chametz. So, but yeah. So either I don't know, but let's assume that's.
I'm surprised that Gemara doesn't ask why do you even have to mention the animals if it's mutar b'hana'ah, wouldn't that be enough?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
guess it's mutar b'hana'ah, but
then you can give it to your animals.
Right. Well, I guess the point is that for 2 points. One is that the chiddush of the Mishnah was that even though you can't eat it, you can give it to your animals. Right. Remember that's how we concluded.
No, it already says, but it says the Mishnah already says.
Oh, you're saying after that. Got it. You're saying why it says that. Well, it doesn't say it's mutar. That's basically, you're saying the next words are mutar b'hana'ah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mocher l'nochari mutar b'hana'ah.
Well, let's keep reading. We're not to the words mutar b'hana'ah yet. We'll get there. It says the Mishnah, mocher l'nochari. You can sell it to a non-Jew during that hour. It says, well, of course you can. Pshita, right? This is not your question yet, but the first, you're allowed to get hamna. We said you can feed it to your animal. Why can't you sell it to a guy? Says the Gemara, it's not so simple. You're assuming you're allowed to sell your chametz to a guy, but in fact, there's an opinion that says you're not allowed to. The Tanya, this is a great brighta. The Tanya beit Shammai omrim, lo yimkar adam chansol l'nachri. You are not allowed to sell your chametz to a non-Jew before Pesach, elam ken yudebo sheyichalek kodem Pesach, unless you know that he or she is going to finish eating it before Pesach. When the Torah says that you have to get rid of all your chametz, it does not mean the way we interpret it, that you have to get it out of your reshut, that you can make it hefker, which is what we do for most of our things, or you can sell it. It means you have to destroy it. Any chametz that you own has to be consumed before Pesach. Okay? That's what Beit Shammai says. And this gets to James's question, which is, if it's true that any chametz you destroy own has to get rid of before Pesach, when does that start? Can you sell something to a guy 6 months before Pesach? So we're going to get to that in a second, right? Which is your question. Can you sell your chametz to a guy now? Meaning, does it even fall into this category yet? So, but Beit Shammai doesn't just tell us, but Beit Shammai says you cannot sell your chametz to a non-Jew unless he will finish it before Pesach. And so in this 5th hour, right, you have a dozen donuts left. The same reason you can't eat them. Well, you can't eat them because your time's up. But you can't sell them to someone who's not going to finish them.
What's the point of selling it then?
Well, you want to make money.
Oh,
You're selling it not the way we sell things. You're selling it the way they. You have a bottle of liquor, right? You got a bottle of Jack Daniels left, and
okay.
okay. Says the Breita, Beit Hillel omrim. No, that's not true. Kol shash mutar leachol, which of course is how we paskin. Whenever you can eat it, mutar limkor, you can sell it. Okay. Says Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera in the Breita, third opinion. Well, another opinion.
This is still the Breita?
This is still the Breita, yeah. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera omer. Kutach. Now, talk about kutach, and we're going to get to kutach later in the next parak. But kutach literally means I don't know how to translate it. Somewhere in English, it's basically a dip. Okay, kutach is a dip that they would make out of vinegar and spices, and they would put little pieces of bread in it. So it was like maybe croutons kind of thing. But kutach and kol mine kutach, any kind of these dips that were basically like something that you would put your bread into, your pita or your food into. A mole.
Mole.
Mole, thank you. Okay, clearly I don't know the word. But
Like guacamole.
oh, okay, there you go. So like that, which basically instead of guacamole, it was something that you could have for a very, very long time. I guess it was some kind of fat basis or whatever it was. But basically, it would sit on the counter. They didn't have a lot of fridges back then, right? And you would dip your stuff into it day after day after day. So it would last for weeks or months. Says Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, asur limkar 30 yom kodem lePesach. You can't sell it to a non-Jew. Right? Let's say you run a store, a mole store, where you sell all kinds of dips. You can't sell anything with chametz in it 30 days before Pesach. So Rashi understands that Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera is going according to Beit Shammai, which is of course a bizarre thing. Usually people don't go like Beit Shammai. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera is saying, to answer the question I raised earlier, that even Beit Shammai, who says you can't sell things to a non-Jew, when does that start? Says Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, it starts 30 days before Pesach. Meaning, if you're 6 months before Pesach, you can sell your whiskey to a non-Jew. It's none of you don't need to worry that, oh yes, some people will keep the whiskey around for 2 years and he's going to have your chametz on Pesach. The rules, the idea, the concept of chametz has not started. We're dealing with Hanukkah now. We're not to chametz yet. But once you get to 30 days before Pesach, Pesach is in your awareness. It's in your halachic consciousness. And from that time, you cannot do anything with chametz if you cannot be confident that it's going to be destroyed or eaten or consumed before Pesach. And therefore, within 30 days, you can't sell these dips that might last for 2 months and have chametz in them. That's how Rashi understands it. Okay?
You have to sell your hamantashen on Purim to get rid of them.
Exactly, according to Beit Shammai.
It sounds like you wouldn't be permitted to buy chametz if you can't be assured that you would not finish it.
Oh, but you can always burn it, right? The point is, if you sell it to a guy, you don't know what they're going to do with it.
Oh, right, yeah.
The point is, it's out of your hands here.
Okay.
So now Tosfot, the Ri quotes Rabbeinu Tam and totally disagrees with Rashi and says that Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera is going according to Beit Hillel. And what he's saying is something very interesting, which is a tremendous chumrah, which I don't really know if we apply it, which is that even according to Beit Hillel, that you can sell your stuff to a non-Jew, which is what we do, if you make a food that's very distinctive, right? You had your branded mole, right? The Oberstein brand. And everybody knows that you're the only one who makes this. It's a very personalized thing. Then we have a new takana that you shouldn't sell it to a non-Jew within 30 days of Pesach because might have it for a couple months. Someone's going to show up at his house on Pesach and see your mole sitting on his table. They'll say, oh, maybe he sold it to him this week. And it's basically marat ayin. It's going to look like you might have done business with chametz on Pesach. And because it's so distinctive, right, it's just yours, that's the prohibition. Nothing to do with getting rid of chametz. It's because people will attribute it to you, they might think Tosa says that you sold it to him on Pesach, you sold it to him through a non-Jew on Pesach, and that's why it's a problem. So in theory, you could see, I mean, back in those days, of course, Jews were or not in those days maybe, but later in Poland, right, Jews sold a lot of alcohol. And so you could imagine if you have to follow this chumrah, you can't sell your whiskey, right before Pesach. I don't know if anyone does that, but anyways, you could see why the issue comes up.
Why wouldn't that
continuously-
also apply to feeding wild animals chametz the day before Pesach? Maybe they'll keep it around for a couple days.
Right, so our Mishnah is basically saying that's not a problem. Oh, but you're saying according to Beit Shammai, yeah. Correct, I agree. According to Beit Shammai, it would still be, it would be the same kind of problem. Because Beit Shammai's requirement, which is very novel, and not something we do, of course, is that you have to get rid of your chametz, right? You have to destroy it or consume it before this man of Biyur.
But now it means you'd have to get rid of it. You'd have to burn it up to
Well, I mean, or become
within a week.
Right. So like we were saying earlier, if you gave it to your animals, you'd have to go check their pen on Erev Pesach and pick it up if you don't have, if it's still there and burnt.
If you gave it to a wild animal
Right.
a week before.
Right. I guess it depends on how soon before. But our Mishnah makes it sound like you could give it to a wild animal. I guess our assumption is that they're going to eat it. Even though they could leave some behind, the majority of the time they're going to just eat the whole thing. I guess. Continue the Mishnah. It said mutar b'hana'ah. So again, Hanan asked the question pshita. If you can eat it, of course it's mutar b'hana'ah, right? You're eating it. So lo tzricha shecharcho kodam zmanu. The chiddush here is that you took your loaf of sourdough and you couldn't finish it in time and you put it in the oven, right? And before the zman was up, it got charcho, which means it got charech is like a coal, right? It got brown. It got burnt on the surface, right? But it took 3 hours for it to burn. It's like a log, right? It was the toughest dough you've ever had. So it took a long time to burn. And so although it started burning during Zman that you were allowed to eat it, it continued burning for 2 more hours and you were baking your matzah on it. So you're getting a hana'ah from this even after the time that you're not allowed to eat it anymore. The chiddush of the Mishnah is that that's okay. That as Rava said, Kamash Malan Kidder Rava, Damar Rava Charcho Kodem Zmano, if it started turning into a coal while you were allowed to eat chametz, then mutar b'hana'ah fil lachar zmano. You're allowed to continue getting benefit from it after this month. Continue the Mishnah. Avar zmano. Now, if you pass the time of 6 hours, of whatever, 5 hours, then asur b'hana'ah. You're not like in Hana. Says more pshita. It's obvious too, right? Now, Rashi really does not like this word pshita, and he takes it out. Because Rashi says, what do you mean it's obvious? There's a whole machloket later about whether chametz is asur b'hana'ah. What do you mean it's obvious? Maybe it's going to the Tana holds chametz is not asur b'hana'ah. But of course, in our consciousness, because we paskin that it is asur b'hana'ah, we have the word pshita. It's obvious that when you can't eat it, you should. When the zman is over, it's asur b'hana'ah. Lo tzricha l'sh'ot rabbanan. The chiddush here, of course, is that 6th hour, that 5th hour, right? No, the 6th hour. Because midoraita, you can't eat chametz from halfway through the day, which means hour 7 and up, right? The Chachamim added 1 more hour. From the beginning of the 6th hour, you have to get rid of it. The chiddush is that, remember we talked about this last week, even if you have to get rid of it, what if you took that chametz and you gave it to a woman and said, I want to marry you with this value? To midoraita, it has value. It's not asur b'hana'ah yet. Midrabanan, there's no value. And the chiddush is that, of course, the Rabbanan trump. And that in that case, the woman's not married, right? Says the Gemara, the Amar of Gido Amar Rav, Amar of Gido Amar of Chia Bar Yosef, Amar of Yochanan, Hamikadesh, if you marry a woman, you give her something to get married to you, Misheish Sha'ot U'Lamala, after 6 hours, Afilu B'chiti Kordanita, even this grain that's very slow to become chametz, Ein Choshishin Kiddushin. There's no kiddushin because anything you're giving that's chametz has 0 value because it's asur b'hana'ah midrabanan, and that's enough to get rid of the kiddushin. Finally, the Mishnah said, not finally, but the next thing in the Mishnah was lo yasikbo katanor v'kirayim. You should not put the chametz into your oven to make it hot. It says where, of course, pshita. That's obvious. You already told me you can't get hana. It's according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said that the only way you can get rid of chametz is by burning it. So you might have thought that since Rabbi Yehuda said that the only way to get rid of it is b'sreifa, that it's a mitzvah b'sreifa, right? That bahadi the kasarf litani minei, that because it's a mitzvah that you're doing to burn it, you're allowed to get benefit from it at the same time because it's not a choice, right? According to the Chachamim, you can get rid of it anyway. You can throw it into the sea. You can burn it. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to burn it. So since you have to burn it, essentially the Torah is requiring you to do it this way. So you might think that since you're doing the way you have to do it, you can get enough from it along the way. It's Gemara Kamash Malan that you can. Not exactly sure what the Havamina would be, but anyways, that's the Gemara.
In the Kiddushin thing, if you gave somebody chametz after it's asur, so now she's got the chametz. I mean, she's not married, but she's got some chametz now.
Well, right.
She has to burn it? Or
Yeah,
what?
she has to burn it. But the point is she's not married.
I understand, but she also, you just gave somebody chametz.
Right. And she might not have realized, but yeah, she'd have to burn it. Correct.
Okay.
Like if you're, I mean, it's probably happened to people. It happened to me, right?
Right.
You're on Pesach, someone walks into your office with food that's chametz.
Right.
So I haven't burned it, but you got to get rid of it.
Girl Scout cookies every year are delivered during Pesach.
There you go.
What's that?
Okay.
Okay.
I think yeah, anyways, let's keep going. Amr Chizkiah. So fascinating sugya coming up. It's going to actually take us around 3 days to do the sugya. So we'll get started. Says Chizkiah, Minayin the chametz b'Pesach shasur b'hana. How do you know the chametz on Pesach is asur b'hana? As I told you just now, this is not so obvious. It is the way we paskin, of course, but there's going to be a machloket about it. How do you know? So Chizkiah says shenemar because the pasuk says lo ye'achel chametz. Right? You should not. It doesn't say you should not lo yochal chametz. It says lo ye'achel. Ye'achel is essentially the passive, right? Don't let chametz be eaten by you. What does that mean? Says Chizkiah, it means lo yehebo heter achila. Chametz should not lead to you eating, and meaning, let's say you were able to get hana'ah from chametz, you could sell your cookies on Pesach, then you would get money from that, and you would use that money to buy food and eat. So what the pasuk is telling you is not only can you not eat chametz, but you can't derive any benefit from chametz that will lead to you being able to eat. So what we're learning from the language ye'achel is that not only can you not eat it, but you can't get anything from it that will lead to you eating, meaning money, Rashi says. You can't use any value because you could use that for food. And that's what the pasuk is telling you with this strange reading of ye'achel. Now, says the Gemara, 1 second. You're implying, Chizkiah, timer the katav rachman lo ye'achel chametz. It's the only way I know that you cannot get hanah from chametz on Pesach is because the pasuk said lo ye'achel. But, right, lo ye'achel. But halo katuv lo ye'achel. Let's say it didn't say it that way. Havi amina, I would have thought that if the Torah just said lo yochal chametz, I would have thought isur achila mashma, isur hana lo mashma. That's what Chizkiah said. The Torah just said don't eat chametz. I would have read that and said I can't eat it, but I can open my store and I could sell all the chametz I want on Pesach, right? Which seems very strange to everyone in this room, but that's how you would have read the pasuk. It's only because it said ye'achel that we conclude that you can't do anything with chametz that would lead to you eating, even selling it and making money.
But there is hana that doesn't lead to you eating.
It's true, but I'll tell you, Rashi says it's true. But Rashi says that most of the time people sell things in order to make money, and most times you make money to eat.
Right, but there is hana that's not selling.
It's true, but I guess
the whole marriage thing that
correct.
doesn't help
you
you
can burn
eat.
it also. You can get heat from it, but I guess
Right.
So Rashi, the way Rashi explains it is that the Torah could have said lo yochal, but the Torah is basically telling you not only can't you eat it, but you can't get benefit from it by saying other actions that might lead to eating. But basically, there's really only 2 categories, right? There's eating and getting hana. So once you expand beyond you can't eat to you can't get more benefit, it includes every benefit, including getting married, for example, or something else. Says the Gemara, that's the opinion of Chizkiah. But Pliga de Rabbi Avo, in that opinion, Chizkiah argues the Rabbi Avo, because Rabbi Avo says a rule, which is also the way we paskin, and this is what we're about to discuss for several days. Kol makom shenemar lo yochal, wherever the Torah says don't eat something, or lo tochal, with a tough, or lo tochlu, any language of don't eat something, it always means echad isur achila mashma. I missed some words, right? Echad isur. Sorry, I just got lost the line. Isur achila mash. Where am I? Echad isur achila, ve'echad isur hana'ah mashma. It means you can't eat it and you can't get any benefit from it. The word ochel if Torah says don't eat chametz or don't eat, I don't know, gir hanasheh, let's say, it means, we'll get to the gir hanasheh, it means you can't eat it and you can't get any benefit from it. Unless, says Rabbi Avo, unless the Torah specifically says, don't eat it, but you're allowed to sell it, like it tells you specifically by nevela. That says Rabbi Avo. So unlike Chizkiah, who says that if the Torah just says don't eat something, it means you just can't eat it. If it says something unusual, it might mean you can't get hana'ah. Says Rabbi Avo, when the Torah says don't eat something, it always means you can't get hana'ah, unless it specifically tells you something different. Now, we're going to see there are many specific exceptions, right? But the first one is nevela, titanya. Now we're going to read the pasuk, right? The very, very famous pasuk about nevela. It says, "Lo tochlu kol nevela." Don't. This is, we're reading the pasuk here, right? Don't. The Gemara has the pasuk, right? Don't eat any nevela. Continues the pasuk. Leger asher b'sharecha titnana v'achla. You should give it to a ger. Now we're not talking about a Jewish ger because he can't nevela either. We're talking about a ger toshav, right, which is a ger, meaning one of the Shiva Amamin who agreed not to do avodah zarah, and they live, they're part of your group basically. That's what they're called, a ger. You should give it to a ger, and they can eat it. Oh, mechor lenachri, or you can sell it to a nachri, a regular non-Jew. Okay, so the Torah very clearly says that. Now we're going to get back to this. But the Torah clearly here says you cannot eat it, but you're allowed to give it away or sell it, right? Now, before we get to that discussion of Rabbi Avo, let's finish the Braita. Says the Braita, "In the ela leger b'netina l'nachri b'mechira." You read this pasuk. It says, "Don't eat an avela, give it to a ger or sell it to a nachri." So I only know that you can do that. How do you know that you can do the opposite? That you could sell it to a ger and give it to a nachri? Ask the Gemara. How do I know you can sell it to a ger? If you read the pasuk, you can read it this way: okay, comma, period. So you can read it as straight. You can read the pasuk that you can sell it. You can either give it to a ger or sell it. Okay, ask the Braita. How do I know that if you want to, you can give it to a nachri? You don't have to sell it to a nachri. So that says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar, you can read the pasuk this way: Titznena, give it to them, ve'achla, and they'll eat it. Oh, mechor l'nachri, or sell it. So Nimseit Omer, says the Braita, Echa ger ve'echa nachri, whether it's a ger toshav or it's a non-Jew who's not a ger toshav, bein b'mechira, bein b'netina, you can do whatever you want with your nevela. You can give it away if you're generous. You can sell it. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's the Braita. Rabbi Yehuda says, I disagree. Divarim kichtavam. It's exactly the way it's written in the pasuk. Either you can give it leger b'netina or l'nachri b'mechira. You can give it to a ger if you want to, or you can sell it to a non-Jew, but you can't do it the opposite way. You're not allowed to give it away. My time at Rabbi Yehuda, says the Gemara now. He says, if the Torah really was meant to be read the way Rabbi Meir said, which is a pretty far-fetched reading, Lichna v'Rachmana, the Torah shouldn't have the word "o." The word "o" implies that there are different categories. It should have said "L'ger sheb'sharecha titznena v'achla u'mechor," right? Not the word "o mechor." "O lamali shma mina l'dvarim kichtavam." You see from here the word "o" that there's two options. You can give it to a ger toshav, or you can sell it to a nachri. You cannot do the opposite. And Rabbi Meir would tell you that the reason we say the word "o" is to tell you lahaktim. It's to tell you that really we would prefer that haktim, meaning first give it netinat leger lemechira denachri. You would prefer. The Torah is saying it's nice to give it to a ger. That's the better thing to do. A ger toshav is part of your brit, as I said, right? They're part of your population, and so they're agreeing to live by your rules, even though they're not Jewish. And so you should give it to them. But if you don't have them around or you're not so generous that day, you can sell it to them also. And Rabbi Yehuda says that's not a chiddush. Holo tzarich kra, even the ger atam mitzvah lachayoto, v'nachri atam mitzvah lachayoto l'tzarich kra svaru. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's a svara. Obviously, you have to support them, right? They were very socialist in that day, right? So since you had to, raise your eyebrow there, but since they live in your nation, as Rashi quotes, it says ger v'toshav v'chai imach. You have a mitzvah to make sure people have enough food and enough sustenance, and they can live amongst you. It doesn't say if healthcare was included, but they can live amongst you. So therefore, you basically, if they're part of your nation, you have to make sure they have food. And so there's a responsibility on everybody. And so it's a svara that if you have extra food, you should give it to someone who needs it, who's the ger. You don't have a responsibility to provide for the other nations amongst you. Now, that's the bright. Now, we're going to go a few more lines, okay? I know it's a little late, but
That's the end of the bright. All that was the bright.
no, that's the end of. That's not the no. The Breita finished earlier, but that's a discussion of the opinions in the Breita.
Right.
So basically, at the end of the Breita, sorry, I'll say about Nevela, we have two opinions. Rabbi Meir, who says that the Torah says you can do whatever the heck you want with it. If you have a Nevela, you can't eat it, but you can either sell it or give it away to a goy, to a ger toshav, whatever you want. Rabbi Yehuda says the Torah is very specifically saying you can't eat Nevela. You can either give it away to a ger toshav or you can sell it to a nach. That's all you're allowed to do. Now says the Gemara, Bishlama the Rabbi Meir. Now I could see how Rabbi Avo made his point. Remember, Rabbi Avo's point was that wherever the Torah says don't eat something, it means don't eat it and don't sell it and don't get any benefit from it. According to Rabbi Meir, I could see why Rabbi Avo made that point. Because Bishlama the Rabbi Meir, right? That the Torah means you can do whatever you want. The Torah said, right, don't eat a nevela. Why couldn't it have just stopped? And if you would have thought, says Rabbi Avo, that when the Torah says don't eat something, it means don't eat it, I would have known without any words in the pasuk that you can give whatever you want. You could give it away, you could sell it, you can do whatever you want with it. Because that's all the Torah says, don't eat it. It must be that kol isurin shebetorah, every other case in the Torah, when the pasuk says don't eat it, it means asurin bein ba'achila bein b'hana, right? Because otherwise the Torah doesn't need to say anything. If the Torah is saying you can do whatever you want with it, do whatever you want with it. Why would I have to have words for that? So that's how Rabbi Avo derives from Rabbi Meir that when the Torah says lo tochal, it means you can't eat it and you can't get hana from it, except by nevela, where the Torah specifically says you can sell it or give it away. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says Dvarim kichtavam huda'ata, that the Torah basically said that you should give it to a ger or sell it to a nachri, not to tell you that it's mutar b'hana, but to tell you that you can only do it this way. You can only give it away to a ger. You can only sell it to a nachri. So now I have no way of knowing that when it says lo tochal, it means you can't get hana'ah, right? Kol isurin shebetorah, minalan the isurin b'hana'an, right? How would you there? What's his derivation of this rule? This is where you're right. According to Rabbi Yehuda, nevela is not a way to prove it, because nevela is there to tell you a whole separate rule, which is that give it away to this person, sell it to that person. How do you know this principle of Rabbi Avo? Nafgalei from treifa. Remember what it says by treifa. Remember we learned in the Chulin all about treifa, right? Treifa is where you have an animal that is alive, right, but is injured, and it has a wound of some sort or a disease that would make it likely to die. Then you go ahead and you shech that treifa, right? So it's not a nevela. Nevela is an animal that drops dead. A treifa is an animal that you shechted that's not kosher. There's a hole in the lungs. You're not allowed to eat a treifa, right? It says basar b'sadeh treifa lo tochelu, right? You cannot eat meat that's from a treifa. But the pasuk says lekelev tashlichun oto, throw it to your dogs, which means you can get hana'ah from it. So implying on the top of chaf bet, oto ata mashlich lekelev, a treifa you can throw to your dogs. The ata mashlich lekelev kol isurin shebetorah. But you can't throw anything else to your dogs, to your dogs, right? So every other isur in the Torah, like chametz or whatever, nevela, whatever, you can't get any hana, well, not nevela, any other isur, you can't get hana from. So from the fact that the Torah specifically said you can't eat nevela, you can't eat a treifa, throw it to your dogs, which is isur hitter of hana'ah, I learned from there that every other time where it says don't eat it, it means you can't even give it to your dog. You can't get any hana from it. Okay? And then the same thing would be true about chametz, for example, on Pesach. Let's just do 3 more lines. Rabbi Meir, who already, what does Rabbi Meir do with the word oto? Oto ata mashlich lekel ve'eta mashlich lekel v'chulin shenishchat ba'azara. remember, there's another case, and we talked about this before, how chulin shenishchap b'azara. So you take an animal that should be a carbon, that's not a carbon, and you throw it in the azara, and you shecht it in the azara, it's asur b'hana. You're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to sell it. Says Rebbe Meir, that I learned from this pasuk, that you can only throw a treifa to the dogs, but you can't throw chulin shenishchat b'azara to the dogs. V'idach, and Rabbi Yehuda would say chulin shenishchatu b'azara lav doraita. That's true, but it's not midoraita, and this is a machloket that we've had elsewhere, and we will have elsewhere. It's in Kiddushin, I think. Yeah, Rosh's correction into Kiddushin. We will get to that machloket separately, but basically, the Gemara concludes that according to this opinion of Rabbi Avo, both Rabbi Meir and who learns from both Rabbi Meir's opinion in Nevela and Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in Treifa, we can derive a principle that whenever the Torah says don't eat something, it means don't eat it and don't get hana from it. Okay? And unless it tells you something different, which it does by Treifa and it does by Nevela. But if it doesn't tell you something different, that's what it means. And therefore, by chametz, you don't need a pasuk to tell you that's asur b'hana'ah. Torah says don't eat it, and that means it's asur b'hana'ah. And as James alluded to, the next couple days are going to be talking about other examples of things that you're not allowed to eat, like blood and giran nasheh and basar b'chalav, where the Torah says don't eat it. And the question is, does that automatically imply an isur hana'ah as well? So stay tuned. Come back tomorrow morning at 7:30 for the next installation.
You know, I heard of Rabbi Yehuda when he said, "Devarim kiftavam," that if the Torah wanted to make chametz asur b'hana'ah, it would have said it.
No, Rabbi Yehuda was talking about the pasuk about nevela.
I know, but if it's a general principle that you interpret the Torah as it is written. You know, and if the
No, but he said just because there's an extra word of "oh," right? The fact that the Torah said the word "oh" tells you that we're
reading it more broadly, like, you know, you just make usher what's said it's usher.
Right. So then we brought, but then we, so that was the question of Rabbi Avo. According to Rabbi Avo, it implies that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with him, like you just said. And he said, well, you learn from Treifa that it agrees with him. So that Torah is basically using Treifa to teach the principle, even though we can't learn it from the Vela. Tomorrow morning, 7:30, God willing, okay?
Thank you.
Beautiful daf. Hanukkah
Shavua
Sameach.
tov.
Chag Sameach.
Chag sameach.
Hanukkah Sameach.